Oh, whoops. Hang on, I forgot a prop. There. I made it, and I forgot it. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there. And Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw out some and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Now, this is one of those simple stories that can be very, very profound. But we can lose the profundity of it when we try to over-theologize it. Let me explain. Once upon a time, when I first started preaching, I really dove deep into the theological symbolism of John. I mean, if you ever read John, it reads as one of those spiritual books. I really love to kind of get into the subtext of all the things that Jesus did and what they meant, especially within this story. The theological symbolism behind the wine, the stone vats used for ritual purification, and the fact that the miracle took place at a wedding. Now, to be sure, there is a lot to say about all of that. But at some point in the past, my wife and I were having a discussion about this particular passage, as we so often do. You know, we sit around and read the Bible and talk about it. I'm kidding, we don't all the time. But this one, we just happened to come across this passage. And my wife looks at it and then looks at me and makes this remark. "Well, I think he performed the miracle just because his mother asked him to." Now, in my noble way, I gave her one of those patronizing looks like, oh dear, God bless you and your simple picture of faith. Can't you see the symbolism here? The Son of God is revealing himself by making a bunch of wine at a banquet using old Jewish purification vats. It's a clear statement about the new kingdom and how there's plenty and it's coming to us. Well, she looks at me and says, "Well, it may have been all of that, but I think he did the miracle because his mama asked him to." The longer I live, the more, and I've grappled with questions of faith, the more I've come around to my wife's way of thinking and her view of theology. "Son, they have run out of wine." That's such a mother right there, the statement. Because, you know, she doesn't directly ask him to perform a miracle. She just looks at Jesus and says, "Son, they've run out of wine." It's kind of like the statement, "Son, your room is a mess." It may not be a request, but you know what the statement implies. And let's give Mary a little credit here. She is worried for this young couple who obviously had more love than money, which most young couples do. And they didn't quite have enough to fund the wedding. This is a big social event. It sets the tone in the village. When you throw a wedding, you expect to have enough to feed people and drink people for at least 2 days. Mothers worry about these sort of things. They notice the little things in life around you. They notice the kid playing basketball who can't afford the shirt that the other team members wear before the game, and they come home and say, "Honey, where's your shirt? I need it." Or so-and-so can't pay for that trip at school. Trust me, at this point in my marriage, I know what that means. I rarely ask for details. I just go with it. Now, I know these aren't life and death things. No one's starving. They aren't about to go homeless. And yet, they are so very, very important in the life of the person receiving it. Mary was worried about this couple and how they would be perceived by the community if the feast doesn't last as long as it's supposed to. Well, you might say that sounds a little beneath the work of the Messiah, don't you think? Making wine to keep a party going. But does it? How many of you, and this is participatory, how many of you lay awake at least one night a week with some nagging worry? At least one night a week. Because if you don't lay awake at least one night a week for 30 minutes to an hour after you lay down, and you're not medicated, see me after church because we need to talk about how you do that. I don't know it's so that at least once a week something doesn't pop up into your head. If you're not, like I said, unless you have to take some sort of sleeping medication, you're going to lay awake at least one night a week and you're going to worry about something. Something is going to bother you. And in fact, I'm pretty sure most of you probably lay awake more than one night a week, worrying about something playing through your head. Now think about some of those things that keep you up at night. Some of those things are probably really big things, like a worrisome doctor's visit, a friend who is suffering, a wayward child you wish would just find some direction. But let's face it, some of those worries are a little mundane. Did I turn the coffee pot off tonight? Did I lock the front door? And is it really worth me getting up and going and checking that front door? Or and getting cold or lay in my bed? Does that not bother anybody else? I've done that before. Or it's Friday night, and God, I have no idea what I'm going to preach on Sunday. So what's funny about being human is that if you haven't noticed, the severity of the problem is no indication about the amount of headspace or time it will take up. Sometimes the biggest problems we can just kind of push to the back, and we can focus on those little things, and they'll just bug us to the point where we've got to do something about it. A very small problem can occupy us for days. So in the grand scheme of things, the problem that we are presented with here is relatively minor. A couple plans a wedding, and as most young couples do, they underestimate the guests coming out for a free party. Weddings are a little different back then than they are today. They were an opportunity for the whole village or town to take a break from a rather hard life and celebrate. And it was expected to last at least a couple of days. And you guys thought Catholic weddings were long. For the record, just have to put this out here. It was real wine, and it had alcohol in it. I can't tell you how many good sermons I heard growing up get lost in the weeds because being good Baptists, we had to use some sort of shaky exegesis and arguments about how the wine wasn't really wine. And usually by the time this well-intentioned preacher finished his disclaimer, I had completely lost interest in whatever point he was going to make from this story, which was really kind of sad by trying to make this really crazy point that the wine wasn't really wine, they lost the forest for the trees, or one sad little sick tree that probably should have been cut down anyway. And I don't know the alcohol content of it, because sometimes they argued about that too. New wine had less alcohol. But it really wasn't important, because Jesus made 180 gallons of it. It doesn't matter how little alcohol is in it. If you make 180 gallons of it, it's a party. 180 gallons. And that brings me to the main part of the sermon. You wonder, where in the world is he going to get? Where's he going with this? When we think of miracles, and this is, like I said, John is a book built on signs, and there are 7 that he builds up to, culminating with his death and resurrection on the cross. That's the way you read John. This is the first one. And when we read miracles, that's what we focus on, the miraculous, where God does all the heavy lifting and creates a way where one doesn't exist. Someone gets healed, people are fed, water gets turned into wine. We focus on those parts of the story that occur outside our traditional understanding of how the universe is supposed to work. The part where God intervenes. However, when we do that, we sometimes lose sight of, we lose sight when we hyper-focus on this divine intervention, that there are very real human efforts that go into these miracles. If you read any of Jesus' miracles, there is often an element of someone doing something or confessing something along with the miracle. In this particular case, Jesus didn't miraculously fill those stone vats. Mary looks at the servants and says, "Do whatever he tells you to." Now, what's interesting here is Jesus doesn't say, "Hey, servants, go on and do something else. I'm going to take care of this." He tells the servants to fill the vats. Do you know how hard it is to fill 180 gallons by hand? 1 gallon, maybe 5 gallons at a time. I mean, my kids still crazily struggle with this lovely little invention here. A milk jug that holds a gallon at a time. I can't tell you how many nights I'd lay in bed and my son goes in to get himself a drink of milk. And I think these things are engineered in such a way that you can't pour it out without making a mess. Like, that's the way these things are engineered. And so I always hear splash, "I'm okay." That's how things, we also hear crash and "I'm okay" around my house. It's how we roll. Yeah, and it's like, and I can't remember times I tell them, use 2 hands. Use 2 hands. I'll clean it up. 180 gallons by hands. Now, here's the thing. The servants have to draw this water out of a well. 1, 2, at the most 5 gallons at a time from wherever the village well was, which was hopefully close by, and then fill each one of these containers 1 pour at a time. It is hard, laborious, monotonous work. And it was work the servants were well familiar with. When we traveled to Africa a few years back, one of the things that the ladies in the villages always loved to do was, I think they really got a kick out of us trying to do their daily tasks. See, I'm firmly convinced that if African ladies decided to rise up and revolt, they could take over the world. I think they're tougher than any Marine Corps, any Navy SEAL. I've seen these ladies work, and I've tried to do their work, and they think it's hilarious. And they have these deep wells in the center of their village, and I was like, and they're pulling them all up, and then so they think it's funny. They invite the American over there, "Hey, pull this water up." And it's a good 50 feet down in these deep wells in Africa, and you're pulling it up by hand. If you're lucky, you have a draft animal. But, it's much more fun just to make the Americans try it by hand. It's probably about 3 or 4 gallons. I pulled about 3 out of that well. And I was done. There's no way I would do that. So I did a little math. If you have at least 4 servants, and let's say that they could at least get 5 gallons apiece, then that's 9 trips. Now, I've carried a 5-gallon bucket full of water. This weather made me remember I try to block out things from when I was a kid and we lived on a farm of the work we had to do, but the snow brought it back up. And when it got cold, we used bathtubs, old bathtubs as watering troughs, because that's the way Jeff Hutto rolled. You know, we didn't buy real watering troughs. And so they would freeze. And our job was to haul a 5-gallon bucket of hot water, maybe 150 feet, to this watering trough. And you dumped it. And you prayed that it worked on one trip. That's what you prayed for. Because if it didn't, you had to make another trip. And you had to bust it. And you would like take a stick or whatever, and sometimes you'd break the stick, and you'd be like, oh, I got to get more water. I wonder about these servants doing this. Did they complain a little bit while they were having to fill these vats up? I really hope so, because otherwise I would have no hope. I mean, I love God, and I love being a pastor, and I love the work that I do, but I whine sometimes about the work of the church. I'll be honest. Sometimes I whine just about the work of life. It's Monday and I have to get up. So, we always have this image of these pious servants going, yes, Jesus, I'll do whatever you want. But nobody knew who Jesus was at the time. And they're kind of going, what in the world does filling a water vat up have to do with this wine problem we have? But they're servants, and so they do it. But like I said, I really hope they whine a little bit. I just do. So once the vats are full, Jesus instructs them to dip out a little and take it to the master of ceremonies. Now, what's interesting here is that we don't know exactly when the miracle occurs. See, Jesus, he offers no prayer over the vats. Did you notice that? Sometimes whenever he heals people, there's usually an invocation or something like that. There's no prayer. There's no magical incantation. There is nothing. Like Jesus' mother's unstated question, he just simply tells the servants to dip out a cup and take it to the master of ceremonies. At this point, I wonder if the servants think this guy's a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Okay, we're out of wine. I'm going to take him some water from the well. Okay, you said so. But somewhere in the middle of this process, an amazing thing happens. This water becomes wine. Now, what's interesting here is that Jesus makes the wine, he does 2 things. He makes really good wine and a lot of it. He doesn't just make some marginal boxed Franzia that sits on the bottom shelf of the store that nobody wants, and you're like, well, we'll go get the boxed wine because, that's what you get. But he makes really high quality stuff. And he makes a whole bunch of this stuff. And it's way better and it's way more than anybody expected. And what's funny is that these servants who had to do all of this work, who may have thought they didn't really know what they were doing, are the only ones in on it. It says the master of ceremonies doesn't know where the wine came from. And the bridegroom, he's probably just so nervous about this whole wedding thing, he thinks it's just the wine. He's still got wine. He doesn't go and take account of it. The servants are the only ones. After doing all the hard work, they're the ones who are in on the miracle. And they're the ones that had to do all of the work, lug 180 gallons of water. And they probably didn't even get to drink the wine itself because they were servants. I think that's an interesting thought. Daniel, you can go get the kids. Go get the kids. Communion celebrates what God has done for us. But it's also a celebration of our willingness to partner with God for the work of the kingdom. We say yes to a gospel work that can, quite frankly, be lonely and challenging and just really work sometimes. But the road and the relationship are worth it. When we celebrate communion, we are reminding ourselves about both of our yeses, God's and ours. We have agreed to follow Him wherever He leads and do the work He has given to us.